There are times, I think, when everyone has taken time to reflect on life. I don't know if you have ever done that or do that. Reflect where you've come and where you are at or where you're going. And the other day I was kind of contemplating about us. I mean the human race. And about God's creation and what a wonderful creation it is. And then I thought, I wonder what it would be what this world would look like if we weren't here. If God would have never created us in the first place. That he would have been satisfied with just what he had done before he created us. And I just wondered if it was a God made an error, a mistake by creating us. No, God does not make mistakes or does not err. But I wonder if God gave some thought after the human race started going amok. If, this sure didn't turn out the way I thought it was going to. I wonder, because he kind of shows he must have thought about it when we consider the story of the flood, where God decided that he had enough of mankind's craziness and decided it's time to wipe them out. Can't take this anymore. They're driving me crazy. But he did save a remnant. Noah saved a little bit. For you see, God made us a special way. God took clay and molded and made us just the way he wanted. It says in scriptures that we were created in his image. In the image of God, then he breathed into us. He blew his breath through our nostrils and gave us life. So think about that as you're breathing in and out, that you have the breath of God circulating through your entire being. Then he gave us the ability to love and to desire. He gave us the most precious gift of all then, the freedom to choose. Unfortunately, sometimes we choose wrongly, don't we? Our choices don't seem to kind of fit. So did he make a mistake? Well, he corrected it, kinda, when he flooded the world and brought an end to all life except those that were with Noah in the ark, Noah and his family. So God didn't completely wipe out the human race. So he must have had another plan. But first of all, he said to Noah and made a promise, I will never destroy nature, my creation, because of people ever again. So God chose another option. For you see, after the flood, mankind kind of started spreading around the world again. We kind of started populating. Talk about rabbits. 9 billion later. So humankind, people forgot about the flood and what God did. And we kind of went sour again, haven't we? And so God comes up with a plan that involved only two people this time, Abraham and Sarah. Abraham and Sarah. And God decides to bless the world through Abraham. But first, he had to make sure that Abraham was the right guy for the job. And so it comes to our Old Testament reading for this morning. A really weird, scary reading, isn't it? That God would consider human sacrifice. So we have this story about Abraham and Isaac, where God tells Abraham to take his one and only son Isaac and sacrifice him as a burnt offering. Yikes. Poor Abraham. Can you imagine? Did he even think about it? It doesn't sound like it, does it? Okay, I'll just go cut some wood and we'll place it on the donkey and away we go. And Abraham builds an altar to God, puts the wood on it, places Isaac on it, lifts up his hand with a knife to slaughter his own son. And a voice comes, Abraham, Abraham, what are you doing? Don't do it. I know now that I can trust you. Let the boy go. And God provides a ram instead. And God makes a promise to Abraham that because he didn't withhold his son, he would make of him a great nation. And through him, the world and all nations would be blessed. That's God's plan. So now how does that play out? For we, rebellious people, even at our best, we're not created as God would like us to be. God created us to be individuals that work in harmony with one another and with Him. But the sad thing is, none of us are utilizing our potential, are we? If you be honest with yourself, I am honest with myself, I'm not fulfilling my full potential in life. God has given us all sorts of talents and abilities. Are you fulfilling your abilities, your full potential that you've been given? Are we, the parents, are we what we ought to be? Or is there something missing? As citizens of the Church of God, of Christ, are we members as we ought to be? And pastors, are we pastors as we ought to be? Or soldiers of Christ, are we soldiers of Christ as we ought to be? We all fall short of the mark, don't we? Because we are born in sin. And we have inherited the sin of Adam and Eve. And so no matter how we try, we cannot be what we ought to be in the eyes of God. So what does God do with His children in the light that we all fall short of God's expectations for us? Well, one thing I can say, and I'm going to be honest, it would be a lot easier if there would be no temptation, right? If there was absolutely no temptation, I think we'd do a good job. I think we'd probably be able to hang in there. But temptations comes along, and some feel that that's God's fault. That's God that is to blame for us failing because we have temptation. Now, if God would quit testing us like he tested Abraham, our willpower would be a lot stronger, wouldn't it? But is God to blame? Is he to blame? What did James say? Do you remember? I will enlighten you, refresh your memory. James chapter 1, beginning at the 12th verse. Blessed is anyone who endures temptation. There we go. So you get tempted, you endure it, you don't get sin, you are blessed. Such a one has stood the test and will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. The crown of life. You know what the crown of life is? Heaven. To be in God's heavenly kingdom. No one, when tempted, should say, I am being tempted by God. No one. For God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself tempts no one. But one is tempted by one's own desire, being lured and enticed by it. Then when that desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and that sin, when it is fully grown, gives birth to death. Do not be deceived, my beloved. Strong words here, isn't it? It's our own fault. Our own fault that we get tempted and sin. It's born in us. Every generous act of giving with every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father's light. So God gives nothing but good. God doesn't give evil. God gives good. With whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. In fulfillment of his own purpose, he gives us birth by the word of truth, so that we would become a kind of first fruits of his creation. God tempts, we can't blame God. There's our own fault when we're tempted and give in to temptation. Well, back to Abraham's story and the promise. How does God plan to fulfill this promise? How does God plan to bless the nations through Abraham? Well, I'm going to give you a reading assignment. In the Gospels, there's two Gospels, Luke and Matthew, I believe, I stand to be corrected, is the genealogy of Jesus. Check it out. Check out all the people that God used to link Abraham all the way to Jesus. That's how the nations got blessed. Through Abraham. Because Abraham had Isaac. Isaac had two sons. The one son, Jacob, had 12. 12 became the 12 tribes of Israel. 12 tribes of Israel became the Jewish nation in which Jesus was born. And so then we go to Mark for our proof reading of that fact. In those days, Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. And just as he was coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens torn apart, and the Spirit descend like a dove on him. And a voice came from heaven, "You are my Son, the beloved. With you I am well pleased." God comes down on his own and comes to fix us. save us. Through the suffering and death of Christ and his resurrection, the promise of God is put in place. He died for our sins. He died because of us. And he has given us life by rising to life. And has given us a new home in God's heavenly kingdom. So how did that turn out? How do you think it's turning out, this promise of God to bless nations? Well, I have a story. And this story comes from the past. Actually, quite a ways back in the past. And it's about a young German man who was 18 years old. He was drafted into Hitler's army. He was eventually taken captive by Allied soldiers and sent to a prisoner of war camp in Scotland. There, for the first time, he saw pictures of the concentration camps run by the Nazis. His eyes were suddenly opened. He saw undeniable proof of the overwhelming evil of Hitler and the Nazi regime that he had been supporting and fighting for. As a result, he experienced terrible shame and self-hatred and depression. Then a chaplain came to visit him and gave him a Bible. And he read about God who loved him so much that he sent his son Jesus to die on the cross to take away his sin. In 1947, this young German was invited to attend a Christian conference where he received love and forgiveness from Dutch Christians who had survived Nazi concentration camps in World War II. The young man was so inspired by the forgiveness he received from these believers that he became a Christian. This young man's name is Jurgen Moltmann. And I don't expect anyone to know who that is. I do because in seminary, it's part of a required reading to read some of the writings of Jurgen Moltmann. For he went on to become one of the most influential Christian theologians of the 20th century, writing books that influenced a generation of pastors. He was particularly known for his theology of hope. And one of his books, Moltmann wrote, "But the ultimate reason for our hope is not to be found in what we want, wish for, or wait for. The ultimate reason is that we are wanted and wished for and waited for. God is our last hope because we are God's first love." God is our last hope because we are God's first love. God created us in his own image. He breathed life into us. God made us to be a special focus of his love. Yes, this past week was Ash Wednesday, the beginning of Lent. A time when we will focus on the cross, Jesus' arrest, crucifixion, and resurrection. No, none of us are all we are, all that we could be. None of us can live up to the expectations of God. But still, God loved us so much that He sent His Son to die for us. That's the gospel. That's what it's all about. That's what we are about. That's who we are. Children of God. A father's love to welcome disobedient children into his home. Isn't that amazing? God's love to welcome us disobedient children to be with Him. A father willing to take his beloved child's punishment upon himself to the cross of Calvary. God did fulfill His promise to Abraham, for we have been blessed. We are the blessed ones, the ones who believe in Jesus Christ and what He did for all humanity. Our sins forgiven, death destroyed, life given, because of a father's love.